Metanomics is brought to you by Remedy Communications and Dusan Writers Metaverse.
Yeah, and I know that one of the things that you looked at, you wrote another paper, I understand, using the same data, but looking at a different question. It's the paper I'm thinking of is Getting It Together, Temporal Coordination and Conflict Management in Global Virtual Teams. And so there you showed that that different teams would deal with conflict in different ways. The list, so the five, just to sort of get them out there, the five conflict management behaviors that you looked at were avoidance, basically failing to confront the problem, accommodation, which is, showing a concern for others and giving in to their concerns, and then on the flip side, competition, which is pursuit of self-interest. Then you have collaboration, which is integrating the interests of everyone involved, and compromise, which is pretty much what it sounds like. So just to elaborate a little bit, here's how you describe competition. Competition behavior, and here I'm quoting from your paper, competition behavior is characterized by each party's pursuing his or her own interests without regard for others. This behavior involves concealment of information, competitiveness, and negative attitudes toward alternative solutions. Competitive interactions typically involve the use of power and domination as one party tries to force its views on the other. So this doesn't sound like teamwork to me, but you find in your data that competition aids performance. So why is that, and do you think there's something about the context of Lotus Notes as opposed to face-to-face interaction that makes the difference?
Yeah, this is a really counterintuitive finding, and it's entirely a function not of Lotus Notes, but of the characteristics of Lotus Notes. So that is the way in which these teams had to communicate was a very lean communication media. So that is, it was asynchronous communication. They were communicating via discussion forums, no interactive feedback, obviously no verbal cues whatsoever. So that's the notion of a lean communication context. And as it turns out, what would normally be a negative conflict management behavior, which is competition, is ordinarily considered to be a negative behavior. It had a positive effect on performance because of the way it played out. Right, so this study was a classic example of illustrating that there are differences from face-to-face in terms of how you need to communicate to be effective in these different communication environments. So the reason competition and competitive behavior was exhibited positive effects on performance was because the way it played out in Lotus Notes was over communication. And what's interesting is that's something that a lot of research has tended to show fairly consistently now. For most virtual teams communicating by all other forms, let's leave off the new ones, the exciting new virtual worlds and virtual environments, all prior forms of communication, which would include email, postings on various discussion forums, exchanging of documents, even telephone, that almost always a common approach to managing virtual teams effectively is to over-communicate, so increase the volume of communication, because there is something lost in translation. And what we argue, what's lost in translation is the interactivity, the richness of communication that we have when we're face-to-face, and some of which is a function of this sense of presence. Right? So in a very recent study that we've just completed where we put teams together to complete work in a virtual world context, in this case Second Life, we see the normal conflict management behavior rules apply. So things that
normal meaning as if they're face-to-face.
As if face-to-face. So all the old research on conflict management in terms of what's good or bad as a conflict management style originated out of small group research looking at face-to-face teams. And so what we've studied over the last 15 years are when you have mediated communications, how do those things change? And in fact, we've parsed through 5 or 6 studies here, and the short answer is a lot of things change, and you have to pay attention to many little things that you don't have to pay attention to in face-to-face because it comes natural and naturally to the participants. In a collaborative virtual environment where you have much richer environment and a greater sense of presence, we find a much closer parallel, the closest parallel that we've seen to date in studying these different technologies to face-to-face communications.